Welcome to the One Priority Podcast, where our goal is starting and strengthening congregations to serve as vital and vibrant missional communities. The One Priority Podcast is sponsored and supported by the Columbia Metro Baptist Association and the almost 100 family churches that support the ministry of the CMBA. This week, I, Chris Reinolds, and George Bullard, Executive Director of the Columbia Metro Baptist Association, sit down with three Columbia, South Carolina music leaders to talk about the past, the present, and the future of church worship through music. Let's listen in.
Thank you, Chris. We're pleased to have with us today three long-term church musicians, and they can talk about, with great knowledge and great experience and great excitement, the past, present, and the future of traditional church music programs. The three are Fred DEFOOR, Rick McCollum, and Mark Powers. First, I'd like to call on each of them to share just a brief introduction of who they are and their heritage in church music. And Fred, we're going to start with you.
Okay, hello George, hello Chris, and Rick and Mark too. Well, just a real brief bio. I'm one of the weird people who have wanted to be a minister of music since I was a young boy. I felt a first call when I was in the fourth grade. My dad was a student at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and we were involved in a church whose minister of music was Bill Roper. Bill was a great inspiration and mentor to me, and knew him and kept up with him his entire life. Along the way, my mother was my choir director. That was when I was singing alto in an adult choir. So that was a long time ago. And my dad is a retired pastor, so all that kind of led me to some teenage experiences directing choirs, and then as I got older, I went to Furman and to Southern Seminary.
Very good. And of course, Fred is just retired after 34 years as the Minister of Music Associate Pastor at St. Andrew's Baptist Church. You know, Fred, I had another person in my life who served 34 years, and you may have known him. His name was George Headley, who served at First Baptist Church, Avondale Estates, Georgia. In fact, when they built the new sanctuary while we were there, they built a sanctuary that would hold 700 people, but 150 of those people were in the choir loft, and 550 were out in the audience.
Wow, that's amazing.
And he filled it every Sunday in terms of what was happening. Rick McCollum.
Thanks, guys, and congratulations to Fred on your retirement, and thanks, Mark, for your mentorship to me as well, and your friendship. Hey, guys, I started at the age of 16 directing youth choir and leading Sunday night worship in my home church. I guess I was influenced most by my dad, who served in bivocational church music for over 60 years. I've been here at Spring Valley Baptist for 26 years now, and we do blended worship. We have done traditional and contemporary, but we put those together as blended worship, and that basically is what we are doing now with choir really as our flagship, and including solos, ensembles, and band and praise team and orchestra and handbells, a variety of different things along the way. So my heritage of church music is using multifaceted ways to lead in worship and music, and that's kind of my background.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm a member of Spring Valley Baptist Church and have appreciated Rick's leadership for the last 26 years in our music ministry. Mark Powers, yourself, tell us about you.
Well, thank you. I want to first say that Fred and Rick are two of the very best in the business and in the ministry, and two great friends. So privilege for me to be with them. I grew up here in Columbia in Park Street Baptist Church, and in my teen years, they called their first full-time music minister, James O. Barrington, who died quite a while back of cancer, but had a huge influence on me. Went to Furman and Southern Seminary with Fred. We were contemporaries at both places, and came into the ministry in churches all across South Carolina, and have served South Carolina churches in Florence and Chester and Aiken and North Augusta, then went to the South Carolina Baptist Convention for 10 years and ended up 3 years ago here at Riverland Hills in the Irmo area of Columbia.
Thank you, Mark.
That's great. Well, thank y'all so much for being here. You know, it's obvious based on hearing your stories and the areas of service and the experience you have that we are in the presence of church music giants. And so I'm grateful to have this opportunity. So we want to take a look at sort of beginning with the past and the heritage of traditional music and sort of your perspective on the beauty and the meaning of a full church music program with choirs and ensembles and bells and instrumentals. So if you'll just kind of give us your input regarding that, each one of you, and then we'll kind of work our way from there. Fred, will you please go first on that?
Sure. Chris, you said beauty and meaning, and church music is certainly that. There's beauty and meaning in all those forms that you mentioned, that certainly that Rick mentioned a few minutes ago, solos and ensembles and choirs and orchestra and bell choirs and praise teams. There's a lot of value added to the life and the witness and the ministry of a church through, I think, at the very least, beauty and worship and ways to involve and attract people to a church experience. In my experience, those are made more powerful and have a deep, long-lasting effect through relationships that we develop along the way. So loving people while teaching and rehearsing and leading them in rehearsals and worship, I think, is a key. Plus, it's just fun.
That's good. I like that. It's just fun. Rick, what about you? What's your perspective?
Well, I would like to mention three things. I thought about this question, and I think there are three things that I feel like that we've kind of lost, and that we need to recapture in traditional church music programs. First word I would use would be inclusion. With the streamlining of music ministry, especially the loss of the choir in many churches, we've lost the inclusion of the person in the pew who wants to sing, who wants to play, who wants to use their gift for the glory of God, but there may be just a small opportunity to do that instead of larger options like choir and orchestra and just a variety of different things that we make available. And we don't, even though churches are now really emphasizing excellence, and I believe that is good, but inclusion does not need to take a back seat to excellence. We can both can ride on the journey together. So inclusion, I think, is the number one. Number two thing I think that we've lost and need to be recaptured is development. We lost the idea of developing church musicians and artisans because we don't provide music education anymore in many cases, or even spiritual education through discipling. So there's got to be ways in the future to recapture the past of things like graded choirs, or maybe something that is a unique angle of doing that for the future. And thirdly, I think that we've lost, and I think we need to recapture the idea of mission with the emphasis solely on worship. In fact, the title position has changed through the years from minister of music to worship pastor. We've forgotten that worship is only one segment of music ministry. It includes music education, music missions. People in our music ministries need to feel like they can make a difference, a long-term difference in their music. And I think that they can do that with those who are on mission. So those will be my three words.
Good. That's good. I really like the discipleship model of ministry that's taking place there. I think that's incredible. I think that's really good. Yeah. Mark, what would you add?
Well, a hearty amen to what has been said, because they're talking my language for sure. At Riverland Hills and all across my ministry, I've tried to develop worship leading families wherever I've been. And in the context of a worship leading family, then so much else can happen, as they've mentioned, excellence and a focus on pure worship in spirit and truth of God, and discipling and missions all of that goes hand in hand when you create a worship leading family. I read a long time ago that people, that problems in church are greatly minimized when people fall deeply in love with God. And I think that's where worship starts. You help people fall deeply in love with God, and then you move them into other things. Well, God is always on the move, and I'm not sure where he's moving and exactly what's happening in worship and how it's going to play out. But obviously we have mined a rich gold vein of choirs for centuries, and it looks like it's running out. Most of my choir here at Riverland Hills, a large choir, but they're mostly 60 years old and older. And that's the case in a lot of places. I don't think choirs will end, and I don't think traditional worship will end. It will morph and change. But even as we started back in our building very early in the epidemic, back in June, we kept going with our choir and orchestra, and across that time since we came back into our building, our traditional worship service, we have a modern worship service and a traditional worship service. Our traditional worship service has 2/3 of the Sunday since we've been back has run more in worship than in our modern service. So traditional services are still viable, and I think you still have to find out what speaks to your people and what's their heart language, and how you can develop worship leading families that give a place for discipleship and missions in those programs, whatever musical form they're in.
That's good.
Mark, if I might follow up on that, because one of the things that you're known for is your emphasis on missional ministry as a part of what the music program of the church will do. So share some of your perspectives on this and the contribution you think it makes to the journey of the church.
Yeah, when I went to the South Carolina Baptist Convention position in 2008, I thought I was there to revive the golden age of festivals and all that kind of thing. And after 2 or 3 years of beating my head against the wall, God showed me that he called me there to start a missional movement. And I wasn't even sure what the word missional meant. And I remember going to lunch with George way back then and saying, tell me what this missional movement is, because I think God's calling me to be a part of it. And so the catchphrase that I've used a lot over the last 10 years is that music is the ignition key for discipleship and missions. Again, when we fall deeply in love with God, it opens up that avenue for discipleship and missions. So we've done all kinds of things in the churches I've served, and I've seen many, many different things done in other churches through the time when I've pushed this, that we're called to grow disciples, all of us, period. A lot of worship pastors say, well, that's not my calling. Yes, it is. It's to grow disciples and lead them on mission. So out of that, if I can give a moment of self-promotion, in 2013, I published my book, which I just dropped on the floor as I was trying to show it to you, Going Full Circle. And the basis of that, and it's available on Amazon, but the basis of that is how can you take a worship ministry, make it all about God, and then spin out of that, in that worship leading family, discipleship and missions. And so we've done, here at Riverland Hills, we've done piano classes and guitar classes in local apartment buildings. We do regular mission projects with our choir. I know Rick has done a bunch of those kinds of things, and in discipling people and leading them on missions. And that's what Going Full Circle is. You starts with worship, it flows to discipleship, it flows to mission, and it doesn't end there. It flows back to worship. When you're constantly being discipled and constantly on mission, your worship is so much deeper, so much richer, so much more powerful.
That's a powerful statement and a powerful concept. Rick, as I recall, during your doctoral program, you did some study related to Robert Weber, who the guru of blended worship, that he later in the last 10 years of his life called convergent worship. And so that you've particularly maybe understood, or one of the things that he benefited in my life was his understanding of the difference between substance and structure or strategy and style in terms of how we think about worship, and those three lenses. Tell us some of the things that you've learned and applied from kind of the Weber approach to things.
It was my pleasure to be in the first class of Bob Weber's doctoral program at Northern Baptist Seminary that focused specifically on blended worship, or as you mentioned, convergence worship. And I identified with Bob in a lot of ways, coming from bringing together different Christian traditions and finding the richness of all of that. My mom grew up as a Pentecostal holiness. My dad grew up in a Quaker setting and later became a Southern Baptist music director. And so I guess I was blended from the start, so to speak. But primarily I was drawn to Bob Weber's popular classic book, Worship is a Verb. That means in the worship sitting that we engage the congregation, prompting them to participate and taking them on a journey to the throne of God, listen to God speak and respond to his presence and his redemptive act. So we who are on stage are not just performers, but we're prompters with blended and convergence worship being a familiar framework. People will engage in that participation. But Weber reminds us in the book that the gathering of God's people to worship is primarily focused on God, not themselves. God speaks to us in our act of response to him. So that's really what I'd like to hang my hat on as far as what Bob shared, is that worship is a verb, which was the name of his book, and to remember that worship is an act. Worship is a verb.
Well, that's amazing. And I think I had heard before that your mother grew up Pentecostal holiness. I'm right now reading the biography of Eugene Peterson, who is the translator interpreter of the Message version of the Bible. And his mother was a Pentecostal holiness preacher. In fact, was the pastor of the church that he grew up in Montana. And, so he made a long journey from there in terms of where he ended up. But Fred, one of the things that I think I've appreciated about you as I've enjoyed your music over the years is I believe that you have a full and complete understanding of the importance of the theology of the music that's being shared during worship and how it contributes to the doctrinal and discipleship development of the congregation. Can you speak into your feelings about the importance of the theology of the music that is shared in worship?
Well, George, I don't know if I've got a full and complete understanding of it, but I understand the importance of it and try to follow that. I think that comes from my deep desire to teach and lead my congregation in worship. All three of us ministers of music have heard various professors, teachers through the years remind us that our choir is our congregation is our largest choir. And I've at least tried to be faithful in treating them that way. You know, a lot of theology stays in people's minds and hearts through the words of hymns, the texts of songs and anthems, which are so often, you know, words of scripture. It just stays in there. You've heard stories, I'm sure, about people with Alzheimer's who don't remember who their family members are, but they can sing texts of hymns. So what we're privileged to do in worship is to share attributes of our God, God's love and forgiveness, God's majesty, God's faithfulness, those kinds of things, and to encourage a relationship with God through Jesus and to celebrate our faith. And we can do that, at least one way we can do that as ministers of music is through effective worship planning, working from the pastor's message theme to create moments in time, I guess, to show God's love to our congregation. And then I think as the other two, Rick and Mark, have so well pointed out, I think discipling follows that. Our desire as church musicians is for people to grow in their relationship with Jesus, to make their walk with God deeper and broader, and to continue to share and minister to and witness to others.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And I think those are extremely important points. Chris?
Great.
Now, gentlemen, I want to thank you for what you've shared so far, but I guess my question is what about the future? I'm a younger minister, and I probably have about 3 decades or more ahead of me whenever it comes to serving in the church and helping and working alongside of worship ministry in conjunction with in our association. As it is in many places, we have churches with no one that's playing an organ. We have choirs that are slowly dissipating, as you guys mentioned, and only about half of our associational churches have those types of choirs. At any given time, there are 3 or 4 sets of hymnals that people are trying to give away. Now that we have the screens and we have all of that kind of stuff, anthems, while there is a little bit of a resurgence whenever it comes to the anthems and doxology and that sort of thing, they're being, in large part, they're being thrown out. And you know what? Just being honest, I don't think there's a whole lot of people out there that want their kids in adult choir robes anymore, or adults in those choir robes. So the question then becomes, what is the church, the denomination, our colleges, our universities, and seminaries, those different worlds? How do we need to offer to guarantee, a quality church music program for future generations? How do we make that accessible to our churches, or should it change dramatically? I'm interested to hear your feedback on that, because it's our desire to ultimately learn so that we can progress forward in a positive way. Rick, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I think the number one thing that comes to my mind is practical experience, mentoring, internships, apprenticeships, real world experience. Because in a seminary setting or college setting, you get a lot of great theory, and that theory you can draw from, but that's all it is.
Right.
And then second, I would say that person needs to be a generalist. They need to know a little bit about everything, about the history, about the current trends and the future trends of church music, but they also need to be a specialist. They need to be the best at something. That's going to make them different and let them kind of cut above the crowd as to what's going to be different about my ministry as I'm called to it. So a generalist and a specialist. And then finally, and I think you've seen this today with the 3 of us, longevity. I think you can best minister to a person, a family, a church, a community even, as you get to know the folks. And being there, the longer you're there, the more you have an opportunity to do that.
That's good. That's good. I like the general specialist. That's good.
I say amen to that.
Well, you're saying amen to that. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, I think about how many times I went to White Oak Conference Center as a minister of music, going to a clinic, a workshop, taking a bunch of kids to a music camp, and we don't even own White Oak Conference Center anymore. So, my first thought of an answer to that question would have been, and still is, to try to identify potential leaders, music leaders. We all 3 told you we got our start when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And so trying to find people who have young men and women who have those gifts and give them opportunities to learn sort of on the job, I think is critical. I'm not aware, and George might can answer this, but churches who have those kinds of needs or interests could communicate with associational or state leaders. Those groups could offer workshops. Churches could offer workshops or clinics for an area, a conference to train people how to direct a choir or how to order music, or those kinds of basic things. Mark, I love Mark's comment a while ago. Music ministry and traditional worship is not dead. It's morphing, it's changing. We're in the sort of the generation that has watched it morph, and it's not done changing. So We'll see. My one thought about, 3 or 4 hymnals in your church is put them out on the table and give them away. The people in your congregation are going to scarf those up.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Mark, what about you?
Well, I think, and this is a strong theme for me, is we have to think like missionaries, and that's basically what missional means. And if you're going to think like a missionary, you're going to discern the cultural heart language of your people, and then you're going to use that to connect them with God and disciple them and send them out on mission. Too many of us, and me included, we're musical snobs. And we think that we have the answer. What appeals to us, what is our cultural heart language, is much more spiritual than anybody else's. And so we see it all the time. Unfortunately, a new staff member, pastor, whatever, comes into a church and forces a musical style on a congregation, thinking that it's going to be what they need to make them more spiritual. And missionaries gave up on that 100 years ago because they realized that if you go into indigenous country, you need to use indigenous music and not force them to sit in pews and use an organ and piano with hymnals and wearing a coat and tie. But somehow we take our societal cultural things and impose it on the gospel. And that's just totally backwards. If we connect with our people in the heart language that connects with them, and that can be in anything. It could be in Southern gospel, Black gospel, jazz, hymns, contemporary music, whatever it is. And that's why we offer 2 styles of service here at Riverland Hills. And I'd like to offer more styles. I like to offer more variety. Connect people in with the gospel in as many different styles as possible to find their cultural heart language, and then disciple them through it and send them out on mission. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to fragment our people by forcing a style on them that's not who they are. So Rick and Fred have done a marvelous job of discerning the culture of their churches and the community they're in, and using it to connect with people for discipleship and missions and worship.
That's great. I love that idea about, whenever it comes to the mission field and worship there on the mission field, and thinking about that in the same way that we're approaching how to do church even today in whatever context we find ourselves. That's good.
Yeah.
Mark, I did see one example one time of where teaching people on the mission field the traditional hymns really worked. And this was a church outside of Cleveland, Ohio, that I had the opportunity to visit multiple times. And they didn't know the hymns real well. But all of a sudden, a Burmese congregation joined with them who had learned the traditional Baptist hymns over in Myanmar. And they came in and increased the singing of hymns in that church phenomenally well in terms of what was going on.
Great.
But, anybody looking at the screen can tell there really aren't any 20-something people here. Even Chris is not 20-something. But let's look at the 3 of you all, Rick and Mark and Fred, and say, if you were 20-something today and you were starting all over in church music, how would you approach it, given what you know about where church music has been and where we are today? And I'm gonna circle back around and go Mark, and then Rick, and then let Fred end up. But Mark, how would you approach it now if you were 20-something starting out again?
I'll tell you, the best advice I could give to somebody that age starting out is my life verse: in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. And let me say that again: in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. For the first 10 or 15 years of my ministry, I thought, man, I'm the MVP on God's team. Look at me, God, I'm doing so many great things for you. And God was like sitting back with his arms crossed. Yeah, I'm gonna wait till I get you where I want you, and then we'll show you what I can do through you. And finally, through reading Experiencing God way back in the 90s, God broke through to me and said, look, you keep this up, you're going to do some good things, but they're going to be Mark Powers size. and I want to do some things through you that are God-sized. And so when I finally just surrendered, I mean, just gave it up, just every day, Lord, this day is yours, I'm yours, this ministry is yours, work through me. And the more I gave it up to him, the more he worked through me as his instrument to his glory.
That's wonderful. That is so insightful, so helpful. Rick, where would you say that about a 20-something music starting out program?
Well, when I was 20-something, I was known as Ricky. So I would say, Ricky, now listen, here's some things I'm going to tell you. Get to know your people, spend time with them, do some things that are non-musical with them. Be genuine, especially this generation can smell a fake a mile away. So be genuine, live with integrity, do what you ask them to do, and then be excellent at what you do. Good musicians are drawn to good musicians, so be excellent at what you do as well. So, Ricky, start with those things, and then if those don't work, listen to what Mark said.
Well, Fred, bring it on home for us here.
I think I would tell a 20-something-year-old who was interested in this to go sit down with Mark, sit down with Rick, or some other mentor, you know, and say, tell me about this thing that you do. I'm feeling interested, and listen to what they're telling you. And then I'd look for places where I could learn how to do it, how to learn, how to stretch, how to grow, so that if I had this desire, I could help people learn the best way I could to use my God-given gifts.
You know, one of the things I've enjoyed hearing, and it's come out, though you haven't really used this word necessarily, is, but all three of you exhume spiritual calling. And I'm so grateful for the fact that God called you into your ministry of music. Chris?
Great. Thank you all for taking the time to reflect with us, and for those that are listening on the past, the present, and even the future of church music. And I'm be encouraging people to go and take a listen to this podcast, because there's so many insightful truths that can be learned from that. So thank you. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining with us, and please be sure to check out the show notes for more detailed information about today's show. Also, if you found this podcast helpful for you and your ministry, share it with others so we can get the word out about what God is doing. Until next time, from all of us, we thank you for listening and urge you to share this podcast with everyone you know. It's the good news about the good news in the Columbia Metro Baptist Association.